My ex-wife cheated, had a kid, and now everyone wants me to forgive her for the child's sake, but I've cut all ties. I was with my ex-wife Linda for 10 years. 10 years of what I thought was a happy marriage, filled with shared dreams, inside jokes, and plans for the future. We met in college, both studying business administration, and hit it off immediately. Linda was charismatic, ambitious, and had a sharp sense of humor that matched mine. We graduated, got entry-level jobs at competing firms, and tied the knot 2 years later. Our wedding was a modest affair in her parents' backyard. My best friend, Jake, was my best man, and her sister, Sarah, was the maid of honor. We danced under the stars, drunk on cheap champagne and the promise of forever. If only I'd known then how that promise would crumble. The first few years of marriage were a whirlwind. We both climbed the corporate ladder, often burning the midnight oil. Weekends were spent renovating our small starter home, a fixer-upper that tested our patience but strengthened our bond, or so I thought. We talked about kids, but always pushed it off, citing our careers and the need for financial stability. As we approached our 30s, the pressure from both sets of parents intensified. "When are you going to give us grandchildren?" became the standard greeting at family gatherings. Linda and I would exchange knowing glances, silently agreeing to deflect with humor. "We're still practicing," I'd say with a wink, earning eye rolls from the elders and snickers from the cousins. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The late nights at the office that became more frequent, the sudden interest in fitness classes, the new friends I never seemed to meet. But I was blind, content in my bubble of trust and routine. Then came January of this year. The month that shattered everything. It was a Tuesday evening, unseasonably warm for winter. I came home early, a rare occurrence, hoping to surprise Linda with takeout from her favorite Thai place. The house was quiet when I entered, but I heard muffled sounds from upstairs. Thinking Linda might be on a work call, I climbed the stairs quietly, not wanting to disturb her. The bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open, the words "honey, I'm home" dying on my lips as I took in the scene before me. Linda, my wife of 10 years, tangled in our sheets with a man I'd never seen before. The takeout bags fell from my hands, spilling pad thai across the hardwood floor. The next few moments were a blur of shouting, scrambling bodies, and half-assed explanations. I remember Linda's face, a mixture of shock and guilt, as she tried to cover herself. The man, I later learned his name was Brian, had the decency to look ashamed as he gathered his clothes and practically ran from the house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, surrounded by photos of our life together, each one now tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. Linda tried to talk to me, her words a jumble of apologies and excuses. "It didn't mean anything," she said. "It was a mistake." But I couldn't hear her over the roaring in my ears, the sound of my world collapsing. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't bear to be in that house, in that bed, for another moment. I drove to my parents' house, the same one I'd left a decade ago with dreams of marital bliss. My mother opened the door, took one look at my face, and wordlessly pulled me into a hug. I broke down then, sobbing like a child in my childhood home. The next few weeks were a haze of anger, pain, and paperwork. I initiated divorce proceedings, throwing myself into the legalities as a way to avoid dealing with the emotional fallout. Linda called incessantly, left voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations. I blocked her number, her email, her social media. The only contact I allowed was through my lawyer. My family, bless their hearts, tried to be supportive. But they also pushed for reconciliation. "Marriage takes work," my father would say, his voice gruff with concern. "Everyone makes mistakes." My mother was more direct. "Think of the life you've built together. Are you really going to throw it all away?" But I was resolute. The trust was broken, shattered beyond repair. I couldn't imagine looking at Linda without seeing her with Brian, couldn't fathom touching her knowing his hands had been there. The mere thought made my stomach churn. March rolled around, bringing with it the first hints of spring and an unexpected bombshell. I was at work, buried in spreadsheets, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway, half expecting a telemarketer. Instead, I heard Linda's voice, shaky and uncertain. "I'm pregnant," she said, without preamble. The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles white. "Hooray," I managed to say, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Then I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. A baby. A child. Something we'd talked about for years, now a reality in the worst possible circumstances. I thought about the timing, did some quick mental math. There was a chance, a good chance, that the baby was mine. But there was also the possibility that it wasn't. I didn't call her back. I didn't want to know more. Instead, I threw myself even deeper into work, staying at the office until the cleaning crew kicked me out. I started going to the gym, pushing my body to exhaustion in an attempt to quiet my mind. I even tried dating, accepting setups from well-meaning coworkers, but each attempt felt hollow. Meanwhile, my family continued their campaign of reconciliation. Every conversation somehow circled back to Linda, to the baby, to the importance of forgiveness. "You don't have to get back together," my sister would say, her voice gentle. "But don't you think you should at least talk to her? For the sake of the child?" I snapped one night over dinner at my parents' house. "Her relationship with you has fuck all to do with me," I snarled, pushing away from the table. "If you keep bringing her up, I'll leave." They didn't stop. Every visit, every phone call became an exercise in biting my tongue. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in a sea of well-intentioned but misguided advice. So I made a decision. One morning in late April, I packed up my car and headed west. I'd always liked the idea of Oregon, the mountains, the coast, the laid-back vibe. It was about as far from Raleigh as I could get without leaving the continental US. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I just left a note on my parents' kitchen table: "Need space. I'll call when I'm settled." The drive was cathartic. 3 days of open road, cheap motels, and greasy diner food. I listened to audiobooks, podcasts, anything to keep my mind occupied. By the time I crossed the Oregon state line, I felt like I could breathe again. I settled in Portland, renting a small apartment in a neighborhood full of coffee shops and food trucks. I found a job at a local accounting firm, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. Slowly, I started to build a new life. I joined a hiking group, started learning to rock climb. I made friends who knew nothing about my past, who didn't look at me with pity or judgment. But the past has a way of catching up with you. In August, I got a call from my lawyer. The baby had been born, a boy. And a paternity test had confirmed what part of me had always suspected: I was the father. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I had a son. A child I'd never seen, never held. A child born into a mess of adult mistakes and broken promises. My lawyer, ever practical, started talking about child support and custody arrangements. I cut him off. "Get me the minimum child support," I said, my voice hollow. "And cut my parental rights." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" my lawyer asked, his tone careful. "This is a big decision. You might regret." "I'm sure," I interrupted. "Just do it." I hung up and went for a long walk, trying to clear my head. I thought about the baby, my son, and tried to imagine what he looked like. Did he have my eyes? Linda's smile? I thought about the life he would have, raised by a single mother, knowing his father had walked away. But I also thought about the anger that still burned inside me, the betrayal that still stung. I thought about how I'd feel, looking at this child and seeing constant reminders of Linda's infidelity. It wasn't fair, to me or to the kid. A few weeks later, I got another call. This time, it was Linda. I don't know how she got my number, probably through my parents. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. "How dare you," she hissed, her voice raw with emotion. "How dare you abandon your own child? He's innocent in all this. He deserves a father." I let her rant, let her pour out all her anger and disappointment. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke. "I'm not the person you want me to be, Linda. I'm not the father that kid deserves. It's better this way." "Better?" she scoffed. "How is growing up without a father better?" "Because the alternative is growing up with a father who resents his very existence," I snapped. "Do you think that's healthy? Do you think I could look at him every day and not think about what you did?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, softly, "I'm sorry. I know I messed up. But please, don't punish our son for my mistakes." I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. "I'm not punishing him. I'm protecting him. Take the child support, Linda. And please, don't contact me again." I hung up before she could respond. Then I turned off my phone, grabbed my hiking boots, and headed for the mountains. I needed to clear my head, to find some peace in the wilderness. As I climbed, pushing my body to its limits, I thought about the choices I'd made. Walking away from my marriage, my family, my child. Part of me wondered if I was taking the coward's way out. Another part insisted I was doing the right thing, sparing everyone unnecessary pain. I reached the summit as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I sat on a rocky outcrop, looking out over the vast expanse of forest and mountain peaks. In that moment, I felt small, my problems insignificant in the face of such natural grandeur. I thought about my son, somewhere back east, probably sleeping in his crib. I wondered if he'd ever know about me, if Linda would tell him the truth or create a more palatable story. I wondered if, years from now, he'd try to find me. What would I say to him then? As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I made a silent promise. Not to go back, not to be the father I didn't think I could be. But to work on myself, to try to heal, to become someone who could look at himself in the mirror without flinching. Maybe someday, if my son came looking for answers, I could give him something more than bitterness and regret. The next morning, I hiked back down the mountain. My phone was full of missed calls and messages, from Linda, from my parents, from my lawyer. I ignored them all. Instead, I called my boss and asked for a few days off. Then I packed a bag, got in my car, and started driving. I had no destination in mind, no plan beyond putting miles between me and my problems. I drove up the coast, watching the waves crash against rocky shores. I drove inland, through dense forests and past snow-capped peaks. I slept in my car some nights, in cheap motels others. Somewhere in Northern California, I stumbled upon a small coastal town. It was the kind of place tourists probably drove right through, but something about it called to me. Maybe it was the way the fog rolled in from the ocean each morning, or the smell of salt and pine in the air. Or maybe it was just far enough from everything I knew to feel like a fresh start. I found a help wanted sign in the window of a local hardware store. The owner, a grizzled old man named Frank, looked me up and down and said, "You know anything about tools?" "I can learn," I replied. He grunted, then tossed me a broom. "Start by cleaning up the place. We'll see how it goes." And just like that, I had a new job. It wasn't glamorous work, and it certainly didn't utilize my business degree. But there was something satisfying about the simplicity of it. No office politics, no complex spreadsheets. Just helping people find the right screwdriver or explaining how to fix a leaky faucet. I rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town. It was drafty and in need of repairs, but it was mine. In the evenings, I'd sit on the rickety porch, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant sound of waves. Sometimes I'd think about Linda, about our son. I wondered how big he was getting, if he was sleeping through the night yet. But those thoughts came less frequently as time passed. Months turned into a year. I became a fixture in the town, known as the guy who could fix just about anything. I made friends, real friends, not the superficial connections I'd had back in my corporate life. There was Sarah, the owner of the local diner who always saved me a slice of her famous apple pie. And Tom, a retired fisherman who taught me how to cast a line and wait patiently for the fish to bite. One day, as I was restocking shelves at the hardware store, Frank called me into his office. "Got a letter for you," he said, holding out an envelope. Came to the store address. I took it, my heart racing as I recognized the handwriting. It was from my mother. How she'd found me, I didn't know. Probably hired a private investigator or something. With shaking hands, I opened the letter. It was short, just a few lines. "Dear son, we miss you. We understand why you left, but we want you to know that we love you, no matter what. Your son is growing so fast. He has your eyes. If you ever want to come home, our door is always open. Love, Mom." Enclosed was a photo. A chubby-cheeked baby boy, maybe 18 months old, grinning at the camera. And my mother was right, he did have my eyes. I sat there for a long time, staring at that photo. Frank puttered around the store, giving me space. Finally, he came back, a mug of coffee in his hand. "Everything okay, kid?" he asked, his gruff voice tinged with concern. I looked up at him, this man who'd become a sort of surrogate father to me over the past year. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've got a lot to think about." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take the afternoon off," he said. "Go clear your head." I drove out to the beach, to a secluded cove I'd discovered a few months back. I sat on the sand, watching the waves roll in and out. I thought about the life I'd left behind, and the life I'd built here. I thought about my son, growing up without knowing me. I thought about Linda, about the pain and betrayal that still lingered, but didn't burn quite as hot as it once had. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues, I made a decision. I couldn't go back, not yet, maybe not ever. But I could stop running. I could acknowledge my son's existence, even if from a distance. The next day, I went into town and bought a small stuffed animal, a little gray elephant. I wrote a short note, for my son. "I'm sorry I'm not there, but I want you to know that you are loved. I packaged it up with the photo my mother had sent, and mailed it to my parents' address in Raleigh. It wasn't much. It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't a promise to return. But it was something. A tiny step towards. What? Reconciliation? Acceptance? I wasn't sure. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just running away. Life went on. I continued working at the hardware store, fixing things around town, building a life for myself. Every few months, I'd send another small gift for my son, a book, a toy, always with a short note. I never included a return address, never asked for updates. But knowing that I was, in some small way, acknowledging his existence helped ease the guilt that had been gnawing at me. Then, about 3 years after I'd left Raleigh, I got another letter. This one wasn't from my mother. It was from Linda. I stared at the envelope, Linda's handwriting unmistakable. With a deep breath, I opened it, bracing myself for whatever lay inside. The letter was brief, but its contents shook me to my core. Linda explained that she had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. She had maybe 6 months left, and her biggest concern was our son's future. She wasn't asking me to come back or to take custody, she knew that was too much. But she wanted me to know, to have the choice to be part of his life if I wanted to. I sat with that information for days, turning it over in my mind. The anger and betrayal that had driven me across the country seemed distant now, overshadowed by the gravity of Linda's situation and the uncertain future of a child, my child, who was about to lose his mother. After a week of sleepless nights and long talks with Frank, who had become a father figure to me, I made my decision. I packed up my few belongings, said goodbye to the friends I'd made in this small coastal town, and headed back east. The reunion was complicated. My parents were overjoyed to see me, even as they grappled with the news of Linda's illness. Linda herself was a shadow of the woman I'd known, her vibrant energy dimmed by sickness and worry. And then there was my son, Sam, a curious, energetic 4-year-old who looked at me with a mixture of shyness and interest. The next few months were a whirlwind of hospitals, lawyers, and tentative bonding. Linda and I talked more openly than we had in years, working through our past and focusing on Sam's future. I won't say I forgave her entirely, but I found a way to move past the hurt for the sake of our son. Linda passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 months after I returned. In her final weeks, she had seen Sam and me growing closer, and I think that gave her some peace. Now, it's just Sam and me. We're figuring things out day by day. It's not easy, I'm learning to be a father on the fly, and Sam is adjusting to life without his mom. But we're making it work. I've realized that running away, while it gave me time to heal, wasn't the answer. Real strength is in facing your problems, in being there for the people who need you, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I don't know what the future holds for us. But I do know that I'm done running. I'm here, I'm present, and I'm doing my best to be the father Sam deserves. It's not the life I imagined, but it's the life I have, and I'm determined to make the most of it.